sense of what it means to be part of this larger universal church. We know there is a pope, and we know what it means to be kind of part of the global worldwide church. What we lose sometimes is our understanding of that middle area, what it means to be part of an archdiocese, where we are part of the local church entrusted to a bishop. What it means to be part of a deanery, the group of parishes in a given part of the area. And what it means now to be part of a family of parishes. And so the church principle invites us to think deeply about those and the relationships that are contained within. The leadership principle, as Father Jan noted, leadership is critical here. We have a great seminary and it forms wonderful priests to do ministry in our archdiocese. But what it doesn't form them to do is to be change leaders, to be organizational managers, to understand how to lead big, complex organizations. It teaches them how to be spiritual guides and theologians and pastors, which is really great. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done that we're not always equipped for. And it's not just on the backs of our priests and our deacons to lead in the church, right? We're all called to this leadership within the church. And so what does it mean to be co-responsible? What does it mean for clergy and laity to work together? What does it mean to have leaders who are really able to help lead us in this mission of being evangelizers, of bringing people to Jesus? So leadership principle is critical. One of the things we've been working on is working with pastoral councils about their role and how they work collaboratively with the pastor to be able to help create a vision for the family of parishes going forward, and equipping ministry leaders and lay staff and everyone that's involved in leadership to really be excellent leaders for the church in this moment. Father Jan talked about stewardship. Stewardship's a critical principle here, and like he said, it often gets you just really tied up with money. It's just about money. But really it's broader than that. It's also about our time and our talent. And I would say that the stewardship principle of Beacons of Light calls us even deeper. It calls us to say, are we grateful disciples? Are we truly grateful for all the gifts God has given us? And if we are, how do we respond with all of our time, all of our talent, and yes, our treasures supporting the church? How do we give our lives back to God? What is our vocation? How do we actually become grateful disciples? And so the stewardship principle invites people into that. Evangelization is the mission of the church. Matthew 28, Jesus says, "Go and baptize all nations. Bring them to me and I'll bring them to the Father." And so we're called to be evangelizers, not just proselytizing, but not just catechesis and formation, which is important. We need excellent catechesis, formation, religious education, CCD. We need all those things. Youth ministry, all of that's critical. But are we, by the witness of our lives, bringing people to Jesus in everything we do? How are we introducing them to Jesus? And so the evangelization principle invites us to new ways of thinking about and doing evangelization. And then finally, all of this gets put into action through the love in action principle. This certainly includes the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, all of the important service and outreach and community ministries that our parishes do. The Catholic Church is pretty much the most generous nonprofit in the world. We make the world better, which is great. How do we put our love into action every day? How do we serve one another? How do we serve those in need? How do we truly bring the face of Christ to all of those? And so this all is of a piece. And so these 6 principles really are what this whole process is organized around. What we hope is that through Beacons of Light, our families of parishes will be able to grow and live out all 6 of these principles to the fullest. It's funny when we talk with some of the families that are a single parish. 8 of our families are single parish families, and they say, "Oh, Beacons of Light doesn't mean anything to us." We say, wait a second. Are you living all 6 of these principles 150%? Well, no. Well, yes, there's work to be done, right? There's work to be done so that all 6 of these are lived out fully for us. I mentioned that there are 5 phases to this project. They build upon one another. They're more cyclical than they are linear. And what I mean is that once you're done with one, it doesn't mean you put it aside never to speak of it again. It means that it continues to be there and you continue to develop it as you go forward. Everything you find up here tonight, by the way, can be found on the website. So don't worry too much about taking too many notes. You'll find everything pretty easily. Leadership is the first phase. Again, this was a critical part of any change project, any initiative ever, is to have good leadership. And over the past year and a half, this is what our families of parishes have mostly been working on. As Father Jan mentioned, priests learning how to work together in a different way, pastors and vicars working together, involving retired priests in creative and collaborative ways. How are pastoral councils truly embracing their role as a primary consultative body for the parish? How are they collaborating with the pastor in a fruitful and mutually beneficial way? How are we equipping our lay staff, and how are they relating to one another in new ways to find efficiencies, economies of scale? One of the examples I use here is if you have a parish and they had a religious ed director, and parish B had a religious ed director, and parish C had a religious ed director, but all three of them were just generalists. They all had to know everything about everything. If you're now part of a family of parishes, perhaps one of them could become an expert in children's catechesis, and one of them could become an expert in teen formation, and one of them could become an expert in adult formation, and then collaborate together to serve that family of parishes. And so this is an opportunity for us to really expand and build and grow here again about growth. Vision then is the second phase. Each of our families of parishes is creating a vision for what life as a family will look like. You might say, well, why do we need a vision? The vision's pretty clear. We have the Bible, we have the Catechism, we have everything every pope ever wrote. Why would we need any more vision than that? Well, right there, you have lots of things, right? You couldn't simply take all of that and say, that's our vision. Well, which part? All of it. Right. So we have to get a little more refined. And I love the way, Father Sean, you talked in the prayer, as we think about the church throughout the world. The way we need to be church is different, perhaps, here than it is in Dayton, than it is in Columbus, than it is in Canada, than it is in Paris, than it is in Kenya. The needs of the people here, now, and in this place are different than the needs of the people someplace else. And so what's the vision for our family right here, right now? That's what families of parishes are working on in phase 2. And that's where most of our families are right now. There's folks from 12 families registered here tonight, and probably of those 12 families, and some of you may be from another family you didn't register, and that's great. We're glad you're here. Each of those 12 families is going to be at a different place in this whole process. So again, it's kind of hard to speak to the specifics of it. Phase 3 is focused on culture. I don't mean ethnic culture. I don't mean secular culture. This doesn't refer to culture wars. This is about ecclesial culture. How are we as a church? What do we do? What do we say? How do we behave? What do we reward? What do we disincentivize? That's culture. How are we actually making our vision come alive by what we say and what we do? And I think it causes us to really consider how we are as parishes. Are we really able to do and say the things we need to be able to bring those 6 principles to life? It's kind of an examination of conscience for us as a family of parishes. Because we need to be able to change that culture, to identify what are the gaps in our culture, what do we need to change, and then work towards changing it so that we can actually do the planning that needs to be done. To create a plan for our family of parishes to live together as a missionary community into the future. That planning is going to take on a number of different aspects. How are we going to plan so that each of those 6 principles can come to life while we observe those 31 parameters? So again, that planning work is the 4th phase. No family is near that quite yet. And then phase 5 is the final phase, and this is really where we put this into action. What does it look like for us as a family of parishes to minister to one another, to live together, to serve together, to pray together in a new and different way going forward? And so those 5 phases, again, build upon one another. It's not like, great, we finished phase 1, we never have to talk about leadership anymore. That's absolutely not true, right? Once we created a vision, we're just going to put it in a drawer and we're never going to look at it again. Of course not. We're going to reflect on it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to say, how does this shape what we're doing here and now, right? So these 5 phases do unfold and continue to develop as we move along. So this is where Mike, if we had multiple microphones, Mike would say, don't forget, you can submit questions. Again, as Mike mentioned, I think we have a lot of questions already. So we're going to do our best to get through what we can before 8:30. As Mike said, if we don't get to all your questions tonight, you can submit them via email. If you registered for tonight, you'll get an email with a link to the website. You can just respond to that email, and we'll get your question. We may not be able to answer all of them individually. What we plan to do is take these questions and expand upon the FAQs that are on the website so that they're out there for everybody to help us really start everybody to get better information and answers to their questions. So, we thought, as Father Jan mentioned earlier, it might be helpful to do a little bit of top 10 myths about beacons of light. So, Father Jan, you get myth number 10.
So, as previously mentioned, these are the top questions that we get downtown, and thought that maybe if we hit on these right away, it might eliminate some of what you were thinking and wondering about. So we are a single parish family, so Beacons of Light doesn't apply to us. Well, no, because the goal of Beacons of Light as parishes are parishes that are vital, evangelizing communities that live the mission of Christ boldly. That applies to all. Yes, as we have begun this, some of our single family parishes or single parish families thought, well, we don't have to do anything with this. Well, as we've had continued conversation, they're realizing that they have as much work to do as anybody else does. So it's very important that that is recognized, and it is happening.
Myth number 9. There's a predetermined, undisclosed list of parishes and schools to merge and churches to close. There's no predetermined list. Any such decisions are made by each family of parishes. Again, we discussed earlier the principle of subsidiarity. And from the very beginning, when we looked at other dioceses, this was a plan in other dioceses that was very centralized. The bishop, the cardinal said, these churches will close, these parishes will merge, these schools will consolidate, the office staff will work here, it will all be on this date, signed, sealed, delivered, it's done. Number 1, Beacons of Light isn't first and foremost about any of those things. Beacons of Light is first and foremost about living out those 6 principles. If, as Mike said, in the arrangement of resources, the bringing together of all your resources and figuring out what you need to live out the mission of the church, if what that leads you to is any of those things, that will happen because your family of parishes determines that's what needs to happen. Okay? So there's no predetermined list.
Yes, the Archbishop has been very, very upfront about that. These decisions are made in the closest, nearest possible place, which is your family of parishes. Right? He does not want to. The Bishop in Columbus goes in and says, you're closed, you're closed, you're closed. Bishop in Toledo has done that. Bishop in Cleveland has done that. We're not doing that. I never planned to do that. All right, next one. Beacons of Light is only happening because of the decline in priests. Well, certainly, the number of available active priests now and in the future is only one factor that led to Beacons of Light. Other contributing factors include the number of parishioners, mass attendance, shifts, and trends in population. The demographics, as mentioned, are changing. You may find it hard to believe up here, but I'm sure a lot of you have children who've gone off to school and never come back, right? And that's happening in an increasing manner. You also have folks who are moving south for jobs or because it's warmer, and unless some big companies put themselves up here, that's not going to change. The demographic information that we have that does forecasting from the government, I know about trusting the government, but also from Catholic resources, shows that even in this area, the numbers of people here over the next 10 years plus is going to decline. So we're trying to get ready for that. We're trying to keep things going. All right, you got the next one?
Myth number 7, Beacons of Light is a one-size-fits-all plan process. I already kind of touched on this. I think by now you'll see that the way this is constructed, it allows for each family to maneuver within those principles and parameters to create a plan that it needs.
Number 6, Beacons of Light is just more work for the pastors and parish leaders. It hasn't made anything better. That is very true right now. I will tell you that most of our pastors are like, oh my gosh, what have we gotten ourselves into here? Because it's tough. It is very challenging. We've already had a couple pastors say, I don't think I can do this. And so some changes have already been occurring. So while it is true that the early stages of Beacons have been challenging, and that's to be expected, we told the priests 2 things. Well, we told them a number of things, but 2 very important things about communication and about slowing down. Don't go fast on this stuff. Pathway leads and liaisons are here to help. I'll talk about liaisons in a moment. There are early signs that such difficulties are diminishing and new life is emerging in the vast majority of our places. For example, mass attendance is increasing in many parishes, went up 4.5% last year. We'll talk about this on a further slide here. But the liaisons that are being talked about here, we have 20-something individuals, most of whom are, came to the end of their secular work life, and they wanted to give back to the church. And we heard this idea from the Diocese of Trenton up in New Jersey, where they employed these folks, and so give them a little money because of liability issues and mileage. Most of them do not want it. They want to give back to God from what they have been given. So we're very blessed in that way. But what Trenton found, and what we are finding, is those parishes that have liaisons are doing pretty well. They're moving along. These are men and women who are not there to tell the pastor what to do, but to offer guidance, to help, when there are questions or things that, as we've said on a number of occasions here already this evening, our priests are not trained to do this kind of changing. And so we're helping with it, Todd. And that was, in those first 3 planning iterations that I talked about earlier, the priests were told, Father, here's the plan, go do it. And they were not given any help. And the one thing that we promised the priests as we went into this is we would help. And where we're doing that and where they're accepting the liaisons, it's going very nicely.
Beacons of Light is only about merging parishes. This is one of the most common myths and conceptions that's out there. Unifying parishes is one goal of Beacons of Light. But these things are bigger goals: greater life, mission, living out those 6 principles, being better stewards of our resources and our people. These are really the true goals of Beacons of Light. If your family decides that you need to close a church, sadly, for some reason, if your family decides that parishes need to come together canonically so that they can be stronger, that's something that your family of parishes is going to decide. But that's not the primary goal. Think of that more as a means and less as an end. Okay? So this is, again, one of the sharpest myths out there that we're just trying to get our head around. For example, Father Jan mentioned that Mass attendance went up across the Archdiocese by 4.5%, which I was thrilled to see. When somebody on my staff brought me that number, I said, no, you mean 4.5% down, right? He said, no, 4.5% up, which is fantastic. That was after 6.5% the previous year and 16% the year before. Now, all of that is a rebound from COVID, of course, right? All of that is good news, but here's the bad news. It's a little hard to see in this light and on the sharpness of the screen, but you see that trend line. We're simply getting back to below where we were already trending. So there are factors pushing on us as a church. There are factors pushing on us as parishes that call us to find new ways of living out these principles and being the church in this time and place.
My church is full, so Beacons of Light doesn't apply to us. Yes, we know the churches up here are full. We're very much aware of it. But do we not want to grow? Truly? Do we not want people to believe in Jesus Christ? And as we keep saying, that is what this is really all about. To bring the church in these 19 counties of South and Western Ohio to a higher place in the hopes of not only bringing back our sons and daughters who left the church, but those who've never been.
We just need to wait this out. Beacons of Light will go away when we get a new archbishop. Isn't this one 75? Isn't that when popes make archbishops retire? He'll go away. This will just go away. As I hope you've seen over the last 40 or so minutes that we've been presenting, the reasons that have brought us to this place as a church aren't simply going to go away. Archbishop has been very clear about saying that the challenges that are facing us as a diocese are well known to those who would become the next archbishop. They're well known throughout the Midwest and the Northeast. They're not unique. Almost every diocese in the United States is working through this kind of process. And so whoever is appointed by the Holy Father as the next archbishop will not only know this is happening, he'll find his way into this process. In a letter that Archbishop sent to the faithful last week, perhaps you saw it in your parish bulletin or online or on social media, the Archbishop said it this way: the challenges are perennial. The purpose is perennial, and the challenges are going to endure beyond his term, the terms of our pastors, our vicars, our terms as lay leaders. This will continue.
One thing I just want to add to that is, and maybe this will be of value or not, so I'll make it quick. You all know that there are smaller families. A lower percentage of people are practicing, or a lower percentage of religiosity, all faiths. Okay, not just the Catholic faith, but all faiths. When we had waves of Catholic immigrants 100 years ago or more, they arrived in a Judeo-Christian culture. It may have been predominantly Protestant, but it was a Christian culture. I don't think anyone today could say we're living in a Christian culture. We're living in an atheist culture that is not neutral towards Christianity, it's hostile. So we are really up against it. So that is why we need to really get back to apostolic mission, I guess I would say. And this is my opportunity to pitch this one book. I've done this before, but I don't know if any of you have read this book, From Christendom to Apostolic Mission by Monsignor James Shea. $15.95 on Amazon. It was $12.95 when I started talking about it 2 years ago, so I think I'm doing pretty well. I get nothing for this, by the way, but I read this a couple years ago. It's a very easy read. It's about 100 pages. It tells the story of the church in the U.S., and it tells the story of this archdiocese, even though he didn't write it for this archdiocese. So I would highly recommend this book to understand the broader trends of the church in the United States.
Just as an example, many people will say, well, our seminary's full. We have a poster in the back of our church and there's lots of faces on it. You keep talking about a decline in priests. Is that real? Isn't this going to solve itself? We've done our best to try to forecast the number of available diocesan priests to serve over the next 5 to 10 years. While it's wonderful that we've ordained so many men in the past 10 years, more than almost any diocese in the United States, thanks to your prayers, thanks to the formation that we give our young men at the family, at the seminary, in every way, in the parish, we still have a long way to go. This decline in the total number of priests available is going to continue, at least through 2027 and probably beyond. We have a number of men, a large number of men, who will be retiring in the next 5 to 10 years after a lifetime of faithful service. They're going to get a well-deserved retirement, but that means this gap is going to be there for a while. It's not simply going to go away.
You can see there, I guess, what we could consider a precipitous decline just from 2013. Back in 1971, there were 417 diocesan priests in this diocese, and there were around another 400 religious order priests. So diocesan are at 132, religious order priests are at about 30. So you can see the situation. We could not possibly give back to one priest per institution, per parish, etc., if our trends continue until probably 2045 at the earliest. This is a real estate play by the Archdiocese. The combined assets and liabilities go to the Archdiocese, not the people. So, Canon Law says that if you decide to close a place, and if you decide to sell one or part or whatever, the money stays here, unless there's a debt owed, and none of you owe any debt. So the money stays with the people. It has never been the case where it has ever gone to the Archdiocese unless there was a debt that was owed. In fact, back in 2000, the Archdiocese forgave some debt in the poorer parishes. So that's not what this is, right? It's about saving our parishes. It is about building them up.
Final myth, beacons of light is too complicated to succeed. There's lots of moving parts, there's lots of elements. It's a 5-year process, but if you break it down to its essentials, those 6 guiding principles and the 31 parameters, it's pretty straightforward. We realize that it is a challenge for all of us in this time. None of us want to be doing anything like this. All of us wish that we had all the resources, the time, the space, the money, the personnel, everything was perfect. We wish for that. None of us wants to do that. But we're faced with these challenges. We hope that Beacons of Light is a plan that allows for flexibility and creativity for each family of parishes to find that vision and live it out as a family of parishes, bringing people to Jesus in their time and place. That's the goal. So we hope that it is robust enough to meet our needs, but simple enough that we can actually achieve it. That's the goal.
All right, we're going to go ahead and launch into questions. And online here, I would say we have 100. And I was probably handed 100 on cards and such. So I'm very sorry. We're going to do the very best we can. And some of these have similar themes. I've been looking through them, so I'm going to do the best I can to ask these. Inevitably, I will not ask a question that you're very interested in, and I'm sorry for that. So I would suggest emailing us at vitality@catholicaoc.org. All right, I'm just going to launch into it. We only have one microphone. I'll hand it to whichever guy wants to answer it. We have heard that some dioceses are now on their second or third waves of restructuring, which makes us wonder if Beacons is too experimental. Can you point to 3 or 4 dioceses that are 10 to 20 years into this process who have increased vocations, mass attendance, evangelization, baptisms, or marriages?
So we are 40 years into this, probably in the forefront of what planning has been going on in the United States. As far as increase, we see it here in our own diocese. We've already talked about, of course, we are coming out of the COVID situation. but it's better than most places are experiencing around the United States. As far as sacramental numbers and things like that, I mean, everything's on a downtrend. That's why we're talking about building this back up, of bringing everybody into the role of being an evangelizer so that we increase instead of decrease. And we're doing the best we can at that. Can I point out other dioceses that are more successful than us? No. Because we're all pretty much in the same place. And we're all 2 or 3 or 4 iterations of planning. I won't say all, but most are. The big dioceses have been working on this for a long time. Chicago, Detroit, Trenton, Seattle, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, etc. I mean, many. And again, you try something out and it doesn't work, so we've got to go back at it.
After the pastor and parishioners discuss what the best arrangements would be for their parish, does the pastor have the option to recommend the formation of a parish cluster or an ongoing family, or has the diocese restricted the choices the pastor can recommend to be either an amalgamation or a merger of the parishes?
It's a great question. If you look at parameter number 3 of Beacons of Light, so again, those 31 parameters, and when you get on the website and you go to the main website, beaconsasc.org, you'll see a click for Pathway. The Pathway is the resource site for parish leaders to actually kind of implement this process. And under the parameters, you can just search parameters, and parameter 3 says that by July 1st of 2027, each family of parishes must have a plan geared toward the unification of their family. So what we expect is that in phases 4 and 5 of Beacons of Light, there's an opportunity for each family to discern what is the best arrangement of their resources. And after that rigorous discernment, the family of parishes will come to the Archbishop and say, this is what we believe right now is the best arrangement. And then going forward, they'll be invited into that continuous discernment to say, is this still what serves us best?
Can you also discuss the difference between a parish and a church?
Oh, sure. Great question. This is one of the most common misconceptions out there. We almost made it a myth, but it's something we just kind of drop in there. For most of our life, we've had a 1-to-1 parish-to-church ratio. Every parish has one church and exactly one church and only one church. A parish may have multiple churches. So you as a family of parishes may decide, we actually want to be one parish, but we want to have 3 churches. Great, no problem. This is a very common situation, actually. My parents lived in Idaho Falls for a number of years. Their family was the Idaho Falls Catholic community, and they had 2 churches, St. Michael Church, and I can't remember the other one. My parents went to St. Michael. Anyway, point being, their parish had multiple churches. They cooperated together as a parish. They shared resources. They were able to manage things more efficiently administratively, but they had multiple churches. They had multiple campuses, and life was lived out that way. So we've tried to be very careful about the distinction between a parish and a church.
There's a possibility which may or may not apply to any family here, but one could imagine it hypothetically, where a family of parishes, say 4 parishes, cannot afford to hire the lay ministers that they need for youth ministry or otherwise. They might have 4 churches that are basically viable, but 3 of them need new HVAC, 1 of them needs a new roof, and they cannot afford to do everything. It's all a matter of choices. Even in our families, in my own family, I can't afford to do everything I want to do. I have to make a choice about what I do. And so you could see a time when one parish, the decision might be made, I'm sorry, probably could have to log in again, might be made to reduce to 3 campuses and hire all the lay ministers you want, because you can serve the entire family best that way. But that is a decision within the family. You can at least imagine it hypothetically. About 8 parishes in our diocese are exceptions to the extinction merger plan. Well, I hope you know it's not an extinction merger plan, but the plan, there are 8 parishes that are single parish families. What is the process for those of us who decide at the local level that we want to be an exception because we don't want to be merged?
So the premise behind the way families were put together had to do with trying as best possible to equalize the load that was going to be on the priest that would be assigned there. So in other words, sacramental load, how many weddings are taking place, funerals, etc., and all the administrative things. So as best we possibly could, that's what we did. And some parishes had to be on their own because they have that much ministry going on. they have that many people, or in one or two situations, they are geographically so far away from anybody else that was the best thing to do. So primarily, though, it's about equalizing the load on all the priests so that no one was going to be that overburdened in comparison to somebody else.
Is the consulting firm that planned the Beacons of Light initiative a faithful group? Are they truly following God's lead on this plan? Can we truly believe they are following God's ways? I'm going to stop it there because it goes on about that. But I want to say one thing before I turn it over to whoever's actually going to answer, and that is that this is the consulting firm that was used did not give us a Beacons of Light plan. The Beacons of Light plan is our plan. We do not have a standing data analytics firm in the Pastoral Center of the Archdiocese, and you wouldn't want us to because it would be a waste of time and money. But we needed one for about 6 months to execute this initiative, so we rented one. But it is not their plan. We certainly listen to their input, but it is our plan.
As to whether they're faithful people, certainly the ones that we got to work with are incredibly faithful people. They are incredibly attuned to what the Holy Spirit is trying to do in the church, not only in our diocese, of course, but in the other dioceses that they work with. And again, they helped us bring the best that they've learned from other dioceses and helped us reflect back to us what we were hoping for life and growth here in the Archdiocese.
Is the only way to accomplish the goals of Beacons of Light by closing parishes?
No, it's not the only way. We think that at the end state, that is one of the most effective ways, is to find efficiencies, ways to work together, cooperate, to share resources. And in some ways, you're going to find that to do that most effectively is to truly be united. But it's not the only way. It's not the only way. But you need to have a plan. And that plan needs to articulate how you're going to be able to live out the mission in whatever arrangement you choose.
Parameter 3 reads, by September 22, 2022, every family of parishes must form a planning team led by the pastor to coordinate pastoral planning geared toward the unification of the family by June 30th, 2027. Please explain the term unification in this context.
So the unification is up to the local group. The ideal is what we've been talking about, which would be to have multiple churches in one parish. That's the ideal. We reach that by 2027. We hope many do, but we suspect that there will be those who are going to need more time. And that's fine. And you may find that after you get 7 or 8 or 10 years out or so, and the population has gone down, that you'll come around to doing that. But nothing is being forced. The decisions are to be made locally.
Are parishioners considered key stakeholders in pastoral planning? And if yes, what is their role?
It's a great question. The leadership principle actually talks a lot about co-responsibility. What does co-responsibility mean? It means the way that our clergy and our laity work together to be responsible for the life of the church. And so, yes, of course, most of the church, the vast majority of the church are us lay people, right? And so we have a vested interest in the future of our church. One of the things that Archbishop Schnurr has been very important, he thinks is very important to point out, is this importance of consultation among the lay faithful. As Father Jan mentioned, when we were putting together these 57 families, we had lots of consultation along the way, informally here and there with different parish councils and things. But then we had an open comment period. We received 7,700 comments, and then we made changes to the plan because of that. We had a survey this past fall after we released the one-year parish vitality report. We received 2,200 responses. We're going to use those to help, again, do better, to look at areas we can improve and areas of emphasis that we can work with. One of the things last year that we endeavored as part of phase 1 focused on leadership, the Archbishop met with all the pastors to make clear their role as a pastor relative to the pastoral council. And then we met with over 500 pastoral council members around the diocese in gatherings just like this to talk about what is the role of the pastoral council as a consultative body and how it best works together with the pastor. And you can find the resources from those meetings, again, on the pastoral planning pathway If you go to the pathway and just search pastoral council, you'll find those resources there. So the pastoral council really is the voice of the parishioners in bringing to the pastor the needs of the family of parishes. And the back and forth between the pastor and the pastoral councils is essential. And so hopefully that is going to get lived out more and more effectively in our parishes going forward.
What are the characteristics of the... I'm going to combine two cathedral questions, which are both asked by two different people, or maybe 50 different people, I'm not sure yet, because I haven't gone through it all. What are the characteristics of the cathedral parish that allow that parish to remain independent? Who funds that, the cathedral? Is it self-sustaining?
So what made that necessary? If you don't know, I'm a rector there. So what makes it necessary are the priests who are assigned there are not full-time at the cathedral. Both myself, obviously I have this role, and I have 5 other offices that I'm responsible for in the parish central offices. And I am then also the pastor at the cathedral. The second priest who is assigned there is also working in the pastoral center most of the time. And both of us, when we don't have masses at the cathedral, are helping in places. There are 3 daily masses at the cathedral with confession at each one of those. And then there's a robust mass schedule on the weekend, which we're also looking at cutting. What was the last part of that question? Support. Almost all cathedrals in the United States are funded by the entire diocese. It's your mother church. Without a cathedral, there is no diocese. Without a diocese, you belong to Columbus or Indiana or something. It's, when the cathedral was first built, there was a 12.5 cent per person, man, woman, and child, tax that was expected to help build that cathedral. When it was renovated back in the 50s, it was done that way as well. We don't do things like that anymore. Now we just depend on people's good stewardship. And so a cathedral has the responsibility, really, of also reaching out and trying to raise funding in other ways. Some of you may get calendars from other places. The Basilica, the Immaculate Conception in Washington, does the same thing. But to actually try to lighten the load on the diocese. Okay, does that help?
Must parishes of the North be closed de facto in order to implement beacons of light? I would say absolutely not, but I don't know if I want to say anything about it. I think the answer to that is very simple no. How can parishioners gain user access to the digital platform with Pathway resources as stated on the pastoral planning pathway?
Yeah, great question. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a little icon of like a little stick man, and you can sign up for an account there. Just create an account, and yeah, for free. It's easy. If you need help, call us, email, we'll help you.
How do, or is there any way for a parish to remain a single parish separate from the family?
The families are pretty set, at least for now. There are possibilities in the future, but it depends on what the growth rates are and things like that. But right now, we feel that we have a pretty solid plan.
I would say, to be honest, it's out of the question unless there's some explosion in ordinations and future, right? If reducing parochialism is one of the just causes, there's a lot of questions in here, I'll say, about extinction of parishes, and this is not about extinction of parishes. It may possibly, in some families, come down to a recommendation to merge parishes. It is not about extinction, and every single Catholic in the Archdiocese will still be a member of a parish. They will be in a parish territory. But if reducing parochialism is one of the objectives, I'll say, of Beacons of Light, why would you limit yourself to rotating just 4 parochial priests? Is the pastor himself then too parochial? That may be a question about an individual family, and I don't know how deeply we can answer that, but go ahead.
Those decisions are made in the family. I know one family up here where each of the vicars is at their particular parish where they are assigned, and they handle the masses in a 4-week period during the month. They do it 3 times a week, and then the pastor comes in on the 4th. So they're doing it a little different. And there's no reason why that can't be done. It depends on what what serves the community best.
If it's up to each individual family of parishes, then why is the AOC forcing extinction of parishes from the top down? We're not. This is not happening.
Let me say something about the word extinction. So it's in the canon, and it has to do with places in the world where the church was wiped out. So if there aren't priests available for tens of thousands of miles, there's no sense in keeping a parish in existence. So these are places where Islam swept over the world and closed hundreds, thousands of dioceses and really weren't parishes as such at that point. The Middle East, places like that where the church got wiped out. That's what extinction is about. And we're not talking anything like that here in this archdiocese or in the United States and the Western world, really.
Lord, I'm just saying that 3 miles from here, St. Patrick's is extincted, and I for
I'm sure you can find an example, but that is not what Beacons of Light is all about. I think
it was merged into another parish. It was not extinguished. Again. Respect, please, and we ask the questions via this. Right? We are talking.
It's not true.
Can you explain the parochial and subsidiary parishes relative to access to sacraments?
This is a question we get quite a bit. When you have multiple churches in a parish, there's an internal designation that canon law expects among those churches, that one is designated as the parochial church, so that each parish has a church. And then other churches are given the designation subsidiary. That's an internal designation. What it reflects is that at least one of the churches in the parish must have such things as a baptismal font, must be able to have weddings, funerals, must have the Blessed Sacrament reserved. Subsidiary churches have the ability to do all of those things. A subsidiary church can have the Blessed Sacrament reserved. It can have Mass celebrated on Sundays, weekdays, holy days. You can have weddings, funerals, baptisms, all of those things. It may, and that's at the discretion of the local pastor working with the leadership in the family. And in fact, as this comes together, I wouldn't be advertising this is the parochial church and these are the subsidiary churches. If a family has 3 churches, it has 3 churches. And you can choose to have all of those celebrations at all of those churches.
With the elimination of masses at many parishes in the archdiocese, 1 or 2 per Sunday now versus 3 previously, this has hit the northern region hard. Your own data shows many northern parishes averaging overcapacity on a weekly basis, while the same data shows most metropolitan churches at well less than 50% capacity. Is there talk of shifting priests where the demand is, or do we keep doing the same thing but expecting different results?
So we have parts of this archdiocese, primarily in the south, where churches are likely to be closed. We have, for those of you who might be familiar with Cincinnati, there's a road called Linton Road, and there's a parish there called St. Vivian's. And within 20 minutes of St. Vivian's, there are 56 parishes. And many of those people have moved out. Now, it takes time to get to a place where Mass schedules are changed. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we have many retired priests who are down in the southern part and in the central part who are still helping. Unfortunately, we can't get them to move up here to help out with things. So over time, we will shift in order to be able to cover what is important, which is everything, but do it in a way that is serving more. At the moment, you do have 2 priests more, and I know it doesn't sound like much, than what we had before we went into Beacons of Light up here. So we're trying to do our best. But we also have a situation, we got 2 men going into the military here shortly from up here. So, it's hard to balance.
Could you address also at the same time, there was never really the guidelines that it might have been guidelines, but we never came out with them as overtly about a man celebrating on a regularly scheduled basis more than 2 masses per day.
Right, so canon law says a priest may only do 2 masses per day regularly. So occasionally, he might have a Saturday morning mass and a Saturday afternoon mass in their house if there's a funeral or wedding. On those days, fine, 3 masses. But on a regular basis, you ask your priest, if the priest is putting himself completely into the celebration, he's preaching well and he's leading his people well, you're dead at the end of that. And then you oftentimes have to go off to the hospital to do things, all kinds of other ministries that occur. And that's why the canon is there. So 2 is the limited number, and when you only have so many priests who can do that, we're doing as best we can. And we know that the capacities up here are high. You have smaller churches, you've got more people who are faithful, and that makes a wonderful difference. And the mass schedules down south, the pastors know they still need to cut some. But again, they've got the retired priests there, and as they get to a point in their age where they can't help anymore, then things like that are going to happen naturally.
If the reason for merging our parishes into one canonical parish is because of the priest shortage, why do we have to take such a permanent approach to fixing a temporary problem? Seems to me that when the Lord does bless us with more priests, we won't have any parishes left for them to pastor over.
We certainly hope that the Lord will send more laborers to the vineyard. Nobody here hopes for less ordained priests. One of the things that Archbishop Schnurr regularly says is encourage people to become a priest. Most people who became a priest because somebody said to them, hey, have you ever thought about becoming a priest? And that's what leads to their vocation. Let me say this, and Father Jan says this all the time. Our diocese has ebbed and flowed with the number of parishes that we've had from its beginning until now. We reached a point at some point where we were darn near 400 parishes at the height of things a century ago. And so that number has come down. It may go back up in the future. And so, again, as parishes come together, that doesn't necessarily change how many church buildings there are. Okay, so we have to kind of get out of our heads the 1 parish to 1 church absolute ratio. Sometimes a parish may choose to combine and keep 2 church campuses. If that's what the parish can sustain, that's great. And if your church is full on Sunday, I don't know why you think about closing it. So, again, keep in mind that the number of parishes can ebb and flow. And if in 20 years we have a robust number of priests that are able to serve, and it makes sense for you to subdivide parishes, again, number of church buildings staying the same, that would be a great problem to have. Nobody would be more overjoyed than the people in this room. I'm sure of that.
All right, this question was asked by many people. From the very beginning of Beacons of Light, it was stated that parishes with less than 50% utilization will have mass reductions to better utilize the priests that are available. Your report sent out, although I will note before we even get to the answer, the priests, it is definitely true about the masses. That's not all the priests do in a parish, as you well know. Your report sent out last week shows that 63% of our parishes, or 134 of the 212 parishes, on the mass attendance, I'm sorry, the computer's cutting it off. Hold on. Utilization reports still have less than 50%. So what's basically saying is that 63% of parishes have masses that are less than 50% utilization. Is it reasonable to assume that when we have priest shortages in the future that these 134 parishes will be forced to reduce masses and free up priests before locations that have greater than 75% utilization?
I think that's a reasonable assumption. You've got 5 years to conform with that parameter of 50% utilization. Many of the parishes in Cincinnati and the Dayton area, as Father Jan said, are relying on retired priests. What parameter 4 says your schedule should not assume the regularity of retired priests helping on the weekends. They should be more considered as, how can I cover a retreat, a vacation, an illness, a sickness? We can't take for granted their ministry. They've deserved retirement. They're free agents. So what is that to say is that, yes, the churches that have low utilizations, and there are many of them, they're coming to grips with that right now. They're looking at those numbers saying, oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to sustain this. And so the goal of getting everybody to 50% means that that assignment of diocesan priests will become more just and more equitable.
Is it clear to the good people of the Archdiocese why the people in the North are so frustrated and feel they need to fight back against the Archdiocese? Why we feel you've made yourselves opponents of your parishioners? I'll say because the communications office receives a lot of your communication. Yes, I'd say that's very clear. And I want to make it very clear as well that we are not your enemies. You may feel that we're stupid or you may feel that we're misguided, but we are not your enemies and we're not trying to harm anyone or harm any church. We have the good of the church in mind and we're doing the very best we can. Nobody's perfect, and I'm sure our process isn't perfect, but it's not done with any shred of ill intent. I hope you can understand that. There's a question here about Holy Angel School, and I'm going to ask it generally because we're not really addressing family-specific questions, but how are Catholic schools affected by Beacons of Light?
So if you paid any attention to the news down in Cincinnati, we closed a school last year, and there's another school that is closing this year. Those are both schools that have been in the process of closing down way before Beacons of Light. So again, people moving out of the neighborhoods and just not enough kids in school. It's unfortunate that it couldn't wait a little bit longer because of what the state of Ohio has now done for us in providing school tuition for virtually any kid that wants to go to a Catholic elementary school, at least. Their tuition is fully paid, up to $6,300. Parish school tuitions aren't that high. So there's no reason why we should be having to close any schools down. One of the things we haven't mentioned here tonight, for the most part, our schools and our parishes are in good financial shape. So there shouldn't be a reason other than a diminishment of the numbers of children in a particular area. We've got a lot of places demographically that show we should have schools, but nobody can afford to build them. It's $30, $40 million to build a new school today. So we don't expect that things are going to close down. And our Catholic Schools Office is getting ready to launch into a campaign right now to help parents who do not have their kids in our schools, where we have schools. I know up here we don't have that many, to move their kids over because now it doesn't cost anything. And they'll get a much better education, at least in Cincinnati.
The AOC posts a completed financial balance sheet on the diocese website, and we have the same documents shared here locally. I assume you mean we have the same documents for our family or our parish shared here locally.
I didn't quite get that. So the Archdiocese posts it, but somebody's saying that your parish is not, correct? And I can't answer that for you because as a pastor, I always published it. And in fact, if anybody wanted to come over and read through the thing, go for it. So I don't know why it's not happening here.
Are the liaisons available to meet with parishioners without pastoral permission? Yes or no? I will say this, the liaisons have been retained to be advisors to the pastors. The pastor may in fact ask his liaisons to get the pulse of the people, but that's up to the pastor, I would say.
Yeah, that's right. The liaisons serve and support the pastors. And there's time for the pastor to say, I'd like you to meet with this particular staff member or this particular commission or committee or group. But fundamentally, the liaison's role is to support the pastor.
Has Partners Edge, that's the data analytics firm that we retained for a few months, has Partners Edge advised priests on what constitutes input from the community on a canonical change? Well, no, because that wasn't their role, but they've not. But I guess the general question would be, have priests been advised on what constitutes input from the community on a canonical change? If yes, what was the response? And if not, why not?
As I mentioned earlier, our initiative last summer was to meet with pastors and with pastoral councils to talk about what that looks like. And so the Archbishop communicated his expectations to pastors. We communicated that to pastoral council members. It's found in the guidelines for the Archdiocese called Called to be Church. And again, that's on the pastoral planning pathway. If you go there, you can just search pastoral council or called to be church.
We may have already answered this, I apologize, but I'll maybe ask a different way. Subsidiary churches do not have the right to have sacraments in their churches. According to the Beacons of Light website, does the pastor have the sole power to say yes or no to requests to have sacraments in subsidiary churches? How can a subsidiary church legally keep the right to sacraments? Your website says they do not have the right. Please expound.
So we have a great microsite of everything related to the canonical questions around this. I'm not a canon lawyer. I'm going to answer the best I can. I'm going to point you back to there. Here's the point. At the end of the day, the pastor is the decision maker for the parishes, for the family of parishes. Our hope, the Archbishop's expectation, is that the pastor takes seriously the consultative nature of the pastoral council and the other parishioners in the parishes. I would find it hard to believe. If you let me finish, I would find it hard to believe that if a parish was able to maintain a safe space as a church where the sacraments could be celebrated, in other words, the roof doesn't leak and the thing's not condemned, you've got a church that's viable. If you have a church that's viable, I can't imagine a pastor saying, we won't have weddings here anymore, we won't have funerals here anymore, we have a baptismal fund, but we won't baptize any babies here anymore. I find it hard to believe a pastor could get himself to that place without serious reasons. But the direct answer to your question is, that's ultimately the pastor's decision.
How are we supposed to follow the 6 pillars if we're not educated on what they are and how we can make parish life stronger, make parishes stronger in the pillars? There was another related question about, I think it's related, what can the laity do within their own parish to help achieve the 6 pillars or principles?
It's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Hopefully you came away from tonight with a sense that these 6 principles really have a backbone of Beacons of Light. On the pathway, again, so if you go to the link that's in the website, and the link that's in the email you'll get either tonight or tomorrow, on the top right it says pathway. And when you go to the pathway, you'll see a drop down for principles. It's really kind of the first thing you see. On each of the principles pages, there's a short video that kind of explains what the principle is. It gives you a vision for what the principle, when it's fully lived out, looks like. It talks about all the parameters within the principle and gives more ideas about the principle. You'll notice that in the Catholic Telegraph over the last couple of months, we've been doing some articles featuring each of the 6 principles, and a lot of the communications that come out now are really organized around those 6 principles. So we certainly encourage those who are parish leaders to approach us. If you have questions about how you can actually bring those principles more to life in your ministry activities, in the groups that you work with, and the groups within the parish that you're responsible for, we'd love to help you be creative about how to get those out. So thanks for asking that question.
This is a financial question, but I'll do my best to phrase it in terms of Beacons of Light. Is it immoral to move funds donated to a particular parish to a different entity? Is this normal and customary for other charities? When you donate, you have an expectation for the funds to be for the original intent. So I assume what's meant here is if you donate to your parish, that somehow the funds perceived to have been used for the family as opposed to the intent, which was your parish.
So long as the parish remains a parish, no. If your intention in giving money in the basket in your church on Sunday, that money is supposed to stay there.
How much does the Archdiocese get from that donation?
9.5%, which is amongst the lowest in the United States. Most dioceses are 20-25%. So let me explain what that's about. All right, so a little bit for support of the cathedral, but whenever there are legal situations in the parishes, you're getting sued or something, the Archdiocese takes care of that. The consultation that has to happen with the schools, the child protection policies and all those things are paid for out of that money. It comes back to you in many different ways. Our HR department, the head of that is an attorney. Our CFO is an attorney. So their services are coming back here. When you can ask pastors that are calling down there all the time to get answers to questions and things like that. So it's it's a necessity that is practiced all over the world, not just here. And like I said, we're amongst the lowest in the United States.
A relevant example would be that before we hired Rob Reed as our head of HR, we had one parish or one school a month getting sued for some HR practice or wrongful termination or something of that nature. Even if you win that lawsuit, those of you that have ever been involved in a lawsuit know the amount of time and money and resources it takes for discovery, and it just sucks it all out of the administration of that entity, whether it's a parish or a school. Since we've hired Rob and implemented different HR or more up-to-date HR practices, we are almost never sued. I'm not saying it never, ever happens. We are relatively never sued. And that is a savings for everybody. If you only know that if you've ever been on the receiving end of it.
We are also self-insured for health care. We're self-insured for, if the roof blows off of this place, that saves a whole lot of money. And that has to be managed in some way. So it's, most people would tell you it's a pretty good deal.
All right. It's said that the reduction in numbers is people moving away, moving south, going to college. But the truth is that people are leaving the faith altogether, especially young people. What will Beacons of Light do to restore faithfulness in those parish families that are struggling? This is an excellent question. As I mentioned earlier, Beacons of Light is a process addressing issues. It's not addressing every issue, but it's addressing the issues that we discussed up here. Within families, hopefully what this will mean is by coming together, like we've had a couple of families where we had two relatively larger parishes combined with two relatively smaller parishes. It wasn't like Jeremy described earlier that the youth ministers could then specialize. It was that the two smaller parishes had no youth ministry whatsoever. And by combining, they have a large, vibrant family youth ministry. So we're hopeful that the resources necessary to evangelize, this is not a new mission of the church, this is the perennial mission of the church, but hopefully this will enable us to have the flexibility to make the decisions necessary to evangelize. Again, I would very, very strongly recommend From Christendom to Apostolic Mission on page 36 of that book, there's the author says you can imagine the apostles having their first evangelization team meeting, and they take an inventory of their resources. What do we have? Bishops, 11. Priests, 11. Seminarians, 0. Seminaries, 0. Schools, 0. Church buildings, 0. Money, very little. Trained theologians, none. Experience in foreign missions, none. Countries in which we exist, 1. Attitude of the population, ignorant to hostile. What do they have? I mean, we're loaded by comparison, right? We're loaded. What did they have? They had the Holy Spirit, and they had the Great Commission to go and proclaim the good news and make disciples. And that's what we're all called to today. We're going to end with that. We're going to end with prayer. Do I put prayer?
Can I ask one question? This is truly a program driven from the bottom up. Has anyone asked the commissioners, like by a show of hands, how many people here want to merge their parishes? Or how many people do not want to merge their parishes? Has anyone asked the commissioners? We keep hearing about the 6 guiding principles. Everything comes from the top down, but no one's asking from the bottom up. Are you prepared to ask those questions?
I'm going to say right now that we just as Father Jan stated earlier, I would say this. Nobody, quote unquote, wants to do any of this. Okay, we're responding to a need and trends that we see on the horizon. We probably should have addressed them 10 years ago. If any of you have been through surgery, like I had rotator cuff surgery a couple of years ago, okay, I didn't want to have surgery. It was painful, and the PT was painful. But I could no longer function with this shoulder. Okay, and it was not going to get better on its own, it was going to get worse. So if you could think about it that way, and now my shoulder feels fine, the July 2022 is kind of the surgery. We're in PT. It's painful. Nobody wants to do this. What we want is a vibrant, growing archdiocese. Everywhere in the archdiocese.
Cincinnati is not.
Well, okay, sir, we're at 8:30, so we're going to wrap up now in prayer. Please join me in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Mary, Mother of the Church and our Mother, present our prayer of thanksgiving to your Son. Beg from him the graces we need to be faithful disciples who follow him with enthusiasm and joy. May our witness to the love of God bear fruit in our archdioceses, parishes, homes, and hearts. Teach us to be God's joyful witnesses, to radiate Christ in all we do, so that all people might know, love, and follow your Son through this life and into the next. Amen. Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much for your attention. God bless all of you.